Okay, so I suggest that we start, but before we start, one logistical thing still which needs to be said. So if any one of you need a PCR test to return back to your homes, please go to Simona from the Romanian National Agency, and she will arrange it for you. Now I'm really happy that we can continue with the program and that we can continue to talk about the basic youth work offer. In the previous session, you've heard what the youth-friendly ecosystems should have and how they are maybe created from Barbara. But now, in this next session, we would like to talk a bit more about the youth basic offer. And why are we talking about youth basic offer in general? It's mentioned in the convention paper Signpost for the Future. So you remember Kuhn yesterday mentioned that it was a big convention happening in 2020. And the convention said that the basic youth work offer and youth policy should be provided on all levels. On European levels, it's done through the programs, through European programs, but on national and local levels, the authorities and other stakeholders should have the capacity to provide that. So basically, talking about this basic youth work offer, it's closely connected to the youth policy around Europe. And I'm really happy that with us on this Zoom meeting, we have, I hope that I will pronounce the name good, Guy Redig, Dr. Guy Redig from Brussels. He was a former professor of youth work and youth policy at the university, but also professionally a care worker, a youth worker, even working for the ministry in the cabinet of minister. So maybe Dr. Redig, you can also introduce yourself, and thank you so much for being here with us. I hope that you can hear us, because we don't hear you now at the moment. And everything was working 20 seconds ago.
Can I start?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay, good morning to you all. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk to you about local youth work policy. I have to say I'm a little bit jealous not to be there, but I hope you can hear my voice, but I hope you don't have to see me. So let's try it this way. Yes, click please. I have about 25 minutes to tell you about local youth work policy, and I will do it in 4 steps. The first, I will go into crucial concepts like youth work policy and what's local. Then I want to tell you about, in my opinion, what are the essences of local youth work policy. The third question is, how can we organize it in a general approach? And then, of course, the fourth step is hear your comments. Yes. Important warning before I start, I'm a social scientist, and that's why I'm an activist. And I always think when you're a social scientist and you deny to be an activist, beware of them, because they are irrelevant or they are devils in disguise. So what you can expect of my introduction is an activist introduction. Thank you. So to start, we have 3 crucial concepts. What is youth work, what is policy, and what is local? And of course, click. It's in my most personal opinion, I will think that not everybody is going to be glad with what I tell you, but let's hear it afterwards. Click. So the first thing, and I think one of the most important things in this introduction, is talking about youth work. As you all know, and maybe you know better than me, that when you talk about youth work in an international perspective, it's very difficult to find some common ground on it, because all countries, all cultures have their own approach and opinion about it. For me, youth work is, in general, one of the concepts in a wide variety of pedagogical interventions. I know that the word pedagogical is not really English. Sometimes they use the word educational. I try to use the word pedagogical. And so youth work is one of many pedagogical interventions, like social work, dealing with health, with care, with prevention, like education, schools, like everything that has to do with the relationship between police and justice and young people, all things about employability, training, competences, sports, of course, cultural and artistic element. And then you have one in the yellow, which is the central issue in this introduction. It's youth work. Click. And when you see youth work, you give a click. Yes, you see that it's part of leisure time offers. And when I say it's one concept of a pedagogical intervention, for me, it's a very specific one with a known identity, and it's also a little bit exceptional. And let me try to explain what I mean by that in the next slides. So for me, youth work is an ideological concept. What do I mean with that? That is, it's a packet, a framework of values, and it is with that comprehensive set of values that you organize an intervention towards young people. And some of the elements in that ideological concepts are in the slide, like it starts believing in the strength and the creativity of young people. That's a starting point. I will later say that it's in the contradictory of starting with problems and with the aim of solving problem. No, youth work starts with a strong belief in the strength and the creativity. It also strives to autonomy. Youth work, in the best of its varieties, is owned by young people. It's for young people, of course. It's by young people, and it's through young people. They are the co-owners or the owners of youth work. And I think that's one of the key elements in this ideological approach. Another one is that it's about enjoying being young together. And enjoying means that notions like fun, like playing, like having good times, like enjoying being young with your peers is very crucial in it. It doesn't mean that it's only about fun and playing, but the approach is playful. Then in its practices, youth work often is an ongoing exercise in direct democracy. Youth work relations are very horizontal and not vertical. It's also about the autonomy. We approach young people as autonomous human beings, and we try to emancipate them and to empower them to more autonomy. Then often there is some reluctancy towards involvement of adults. Adults, of course, are close to youth work, sometimes very close. They have some responsibilities. But on the other hand, when we really want to make youth work as ownership by young people, we have to be reluctant to the approaches of adults and also the goals adults some cherish towards youth work. The same thing with professional youth work. That's something that is very difficult to explain sometimes in international contexts. But professional youth workers, of course, they are welcome and sometimes they're very needed. But they have to be into this ideological frame. So they have to serve the identity. They don't try to make youth work dependent of professionals, but just independent of professionals. Then youth work is not commercial and in some times really anti-commercial. That's some difference between sports. For instance, sports most of the time are very close to commercial involvement, but youth work is most of the time not commercial and sometimes even anti-commercial. And then sometimes, and most of the times, the processes in youth work are more important than the results. I often give the examples that when, of course, in youth work, you can be artistic, but you don't learn to play the violin, but you can play violin. You don't learn to sing, but you can sing along as much as you want. You can play football or other sports, but you're not there to learn and to excel in the sports. Doing the things is more important than the result of doing those things. In my opinion and in my approach, those are the most important characteristics of what I should identify as the identity of youth work. Yes, click. So, sorry, the one, yes. I use often the word useful playfulness and playful usefulness. It's not my invention. It's the invention of a Belgian professor who described youth work, Flemish youth work, with these phrases: useful playfulness and playful usefulness. And I think it's nice said about the crucial characteristic of youth work. Yes. So it's important, talking about youth work, to set the primary characteristics versus the secondary characteristics. The first, like you see, primary characteristics of youth work is offensive. It's built on the power, like I said before. It's the belief of the possibilities and the strengths of young people. It's giving spaces to develop talents and chances. It's aiming the creation of autonomy, and playing and enjoying are crucial. But if you go and see to the secondary characteristics, yes, you see some other things like curing and healing, taking care of problems and recovering, to be preventive, to forecome imminent dysfunctions, to be protective, to be focused on augmenting competences, accent on learning, enlarging all kinds of skills. And what I try to say with this scheme is that they are always present in youth work, but they are not primary, in my point of view, they are secondary. And it's very important to see the relation between those two. Yes, if you click, you see on the first time, I would say there is a kind of a perversion when the secondary characteristics are becoming the primary, and the primary become the secondary. It's a perversion of goals and of identity, and it's increasing the influence and the impact of youth work. Yes, click. And on the other side, there's always the possibility, and I think you can feel what I say, that the first and the primary characteristics of youth work as a phenomenon, is often colonized and by other systems, and I would talk about an unwanted instrumentalization, because when you have too much emphasis on usefulness, then the playfulness will disappear. And often we see that other actors and other pedagogical interventions use youth work methods. They will play, they will go on campsites, they do funny things, but using youth work methods don't make you to youth work. And even that's a little bit of a danger, that it will colonize youth work. And I don't have to tell you that governments often see the usefulness of youth work in its secondary characteristics, and often the result is that the power of youth work vanishes because the primary characteristics become secondary. Yes? The second thing I want to talk about is policy. That's a more simple notion, I think. What is policy? Simply, it's trying to manage a wanted future. How do you do it? Well, you put goals, what you want to be happening in the future. You describe strategies, methods, and instruments to get there, and you put them in a time frame. The notion planning is very close to policy making. In this introduction, policy is linked to governments, and it's really crucial for governments that they work with a policy. It's the whole of their action. What are they trying to achieve? Why do they try that? How do they do that? And they have political and administration instruments. Where do they? For whom? By what means and instruments, etc. So in short, policy is a governmental state of being. It's what they try to do always, and they want to try to manage a wanted future. Okay, 3. What's local? Also there we have just even a minute we have to think about it, because all governments have the same logics. They're always about a well-defined territory. They're always about competences. What can they do? What may they do? What must they do? and they are always interrelated to more central or more decentral government levels. I don't have to tell you that in the last decade, the European level, and especially in the European Union, the international governmental level has become increasingly important. But on the other side, what we see in a lot of countries is also that the most local level, sometimes it's the municipality level or the city level, is also become more important, and that the old nation state has lost a little bit of its importance. Local in this introduction, it's about the most nearby government. It's the closest government to the daily life of citizens, in our case of young citizens. What I remarked that in most of European countries, local governments have no explicit competences for youth or youth work. There are seldom laws that oblige them to do certain things. Most of the time, the more central levels deal about education, about welfare, about justice, about mobility, about employability, and so on. But on the other hand, because they don't have that explicit competences, they often possess about a lot of autonomy to make own choices, to put own goals and own important things in the scope. So most of the time, local governments have the opportunity to work on a local youth or youth work policy if they want to. And it's about the priority, it's about the importance they put on youth work if they will build out their own youth work policy on a local level. So that's about the three main topics about youth work, about policy, about local. Let's talk about the essences of local youth work policy. I would describe it in one word: creating space for youth work. It sounds easy, but if you think about it, it's a good notion to see what local governments can do for youth work. And I will say it in 4 dimensions. Yes, the first dimension, click, is a physical space. It sounds very normal, but often in local governments, it's very important. It's about the square meters. It's about buildings, it's about room in the literary way to build out youth work. It's a room to gather, to play, to feast, to make music, to hang around. It's outside, indoor, and it's indoor. So local government must provide physical space for youth work to develop. A second dimension is the mental space. That's about the thinking, it's about the state of mind of local governments. Do they appreciate, and they have to appreciate, the identity of growing people, the way they deal with reality, the way they will organize their own time. They have to be open-minded, they have to be curious and looking for interaction. They have to be an open mind for the way young people are dealing with their life, also in leisure time and also when they choose to be organized as youth work organizations. The third one is policy space. Local governments must, if they really want to work with local youth work, they have to create in their policy making a specific youth work policy. Means goals for the youth work, the instruments to support it, to let it grow, to facilitate it. And they have to put in place the necessary actors to have a youth work policy. I will go into it further, but we have to create, as a local government, actors to build out a good and solid youth work policy. And the last one is the space in time. It's very important that we have long-term perspectives, that it's not about a project for 2 or 3 years and then up to another business, that it becomes really with an endurance and with a long-term view and with moments of evaluation and actualization. It has to become an important part of the global local policy, and it has to deserve its own place. And it's a place that it's not in a project time, it's structure, and it will be there for many years. So creating space for youth work is is a notion to use to overview what local governments can do to build out a local youth work policy. So what about the necessary actors? I will have a little bit of an analysis in some dimensions. The first one, it's the most classic dimension, is what we call a democratic acts. It's politicians who are legislative or executive, and it's about young citizens, the part of the populations. I will not go in very deeply, but often young people are defined up to 15 years. In some cultures in Europe, like in my culture, youth is the whole of the population between 0 and 25 or 30 years. There's also children involved. But let's not go into that. The first acts and the first actors involved in building up a youth work policy are, of course, the elected politicians and the young citizens who are co-owners of also local society. The second axe is another axe. It's about the civil society, and in our case, it's about the youth work organizations who are there, who are organized by and through and for young people, and they are there to stay, and they are involved, and they have a voice, and they want to go into the political arena and to define youth work policy also. But on the other hand, it's very important for a local government to put us also a civil servant actor. That can be a local youth officer, that can be a local youth service. It's the administration of government. And those two have another relation. It's what I should call the expertocracy acts. It's people who are really knowing what they're talking about. You have to see that most of young people, when you ask them about youth work, they have some vague thinking about it, and they can express what they want, but they don't think in structures like youth work and welfare and so on. But in a policy making, you have these acts of the real experts, but there are two kinds of the experts: the civil society, so the organized young people, and also the civil servants who are specialized in making youth work policy inside government. So if you see, and you have another click, please, you see the difference between governments, with on the one hand the politicians and the civil servants, on the other hand the population organized by civil society and of course the young people themselves. And when you see it together, it's the aim of a local youth work policy to create a common youth work policy, that it's a creation of four kind of actors to build together a youth work policy. To translate this in more concrete policy plans, to talk about the goals, the instruments, and so on and so on. So it's important that you see the whole of the picture and the whole of the four groups of actors. And if you analyze this local youth work policy, if one of the actors is not there or very weak, or on the other hand, very strong and dominating, it can give a problem. It's about organizing a good communication and a good common project with those four groups of actors. If you go a little bit further, then you see that on the international level, and that's important for this kind of conferences, that of course the civil society, the youth work organizations have also supra-local, sometimes on the level of the nation state, but also on the level of the Council of Europe and the European Union. You have networks of youth work, national, international. You have supra-local networks of local authorities, of course, inside, for instance, the Council of Europe. And then you have the supra-network of youth officers. When I was young and reckless, we had a European Youth Officer Forum. I'm talking about the 80s and the 90s. I don't know if it still exists, but I never heard anything about it. But I think there's still some networks of youth officers, of local youth officers throughout Europe. So this together is an overview of organizing the actors involved to build out a common youth work policy on the local level. The next, please. So the last question I want to ask and give some answers maybe, it's how to organize a local youth work policy. And of course, central in it, it's the choice of a local government. to organize it. And then you need the civil servants. And so a lot of importance in organizing the government policy, of course, is the local youth service or the local youth officer, who has to implement the plans and to create and realize the things that are grown out of the common network of actors. And you could analyze it in three aspects. So three tasks of those local youth services and offices. The first is about a systematic support, facilitate and paying attention and care for youth work. It's central. It's the first, and it's not just the first. It's the most important, that there is a caring and a supporting of youth work, of organizations of young people in leisure time with their own chosen systems and so on. And how can you do it more and more in the practice? You have to structure the subsidies. You have to have money to give them opportunities. It can be project-based. It can be structural. Think about the space in time. That's more a structural way, that you give them the financial means of making themselves work. You cannot compare that with subsidies for welfare organizations, because they're sometimes for 100% subsidized. This is more a subsidy to help them and to get them started, to give them a survival modus, because a lot of those local youth work organizations find also own money on several ways. The second thing is providing services like go back one, please. Yes, it's about giving place, housing, playgrounds, giving them sometimes also the material to do so. So really a very practical support, offering all kinds of services. And the third way of giving that support is the coaching, is help them by management, is helping them by communication. If they get into problems with their neighbors or with their parish or with whatever it is, then you can coach them, you can help them coming out of the government to create a good care for what they are doing, even when they have it very difficult to survive sometimes. So the first crucial thing is the systematic support. The second one is very close to the first one, and it's very important. Yes, a click, please. It's the systematic working on participation. You cannot make, like I said before, when I talked about the 4 actor groups, you cannot make a youth work policy without youth work and without young people. So you have to invest in participation and in an interactive communication. You can do it on several methods. You can support a participation body. Often it's a local youth council that exists. And sometimes people say it's quite old-fashioned, and sometimes they say they're just dealing with their own interests and so on. Forget it. I think to have a body, a structural way of gathering youth and youth work on a local level, it's very important. And I think it's one of the key elements in organizing your communication. But of course, it's not enough. Sometimes it's needed to be ad hoc, to have project-based sharp participation projects with young people on their neighborhood, on some new styles that come up, some subcultures that appears, that you have to go and look for them, that you go outreaching for them, that you go and talk to them and communicate with them on the spot, and not wait that until they come to you as a youth service or to come to the local youth council. And the third one is maybe the most, no, not yet. It's the first, sorry. It's an open attitude because towards youth work. It's what I called also the mental space. Youth work is not the same as organizations have grown up. They have other cultures. They do other things. Young people are growing and are sometimes close to the borders and so on. I think that in this interactive communication, you need to respect the way of young people and also to deal with them in their own languages and close to their own systems. And then to close down the third one, it's about the integration and the weaving of a more comprehensive youth policy. Youth work policy is a part of youth policy. Youth policy is, of course, much broader than only youth work. It's also about the close by aspect like sports, culture, education, but also social affair, police, housing, employment, mobility, and so on. Sometimes it's needed to bring youth work linked and closer to other ways and other elements of the youth policy. I think this integrating acting is also an important way of organizing your local youth work policy. And I think that the last one standing there is defending the exceptional identity of youth work. Often youth work is not taken seriously by other actors and players in society. They say it's just for fun, it's just a secondary important thing, it's not solving problems, but causing problems and so on. So I think in this third approach, the local youth service and also the local youth work policy has to defend the identity and the exceptional identity of youth work and to protect it from instrumentalizations and sometimes hostile approaches by other players. So in a whole, you see three ways of organizing very practical a local youth work policy on a local government level. Okay, so conclusions of this short introduction. One, youth work is a specific and exceptional pedagogical intervention. I would describe it as a useful playfulness and a playful usefulness. Secondly, when you're convinced that youth work is that important and specific, I think that local governments must prioritize youth work by building up a youth work policy. And it's by providing physical, mental, policy, and time spaces, really to create room in the several dimensions for youth work, for local youth work. Three, when you want to do so, you have to organize and to engage all actors involved in a common approach based on communication, interaction, and respect for the role of all actors. It's politicians, it's civil servants, it's a civil society organization, youth work, and it's young people as a whole of young citizens, co-owners, owners of society. And fourth, of course, at last, you have to implement in three policy actions: support, participation, and integration. That should be and can be the conclusions of my intervention here on this conference. And I have to close with some statements because I'm an activist, so I cannot conclude without statements. And that's about the last slide I will present you. The first, I'm really convinced that there will be no youth work policy if not a local youth work policy. Nation states, international systems can talk and talk and talk and work about youth work, but if it's not translated and implemented and concretized in a local youth work policy, there will be no youth work policy, because youth work is close to young people, nearby, in the really essential meaning in their own environment where they live, they work, they sleep, and they enjoy. Second one is often they tell us you have to think globally and act locally. I don't like that slogan. I think you have to think locally before acting locally. So don't act and think globally without knowing the local scene. Often when I'm on European conferences about youth work and about youth policy, they often speak about the local level and they always emphasize the importance of it, but often they are very distant of it. So if you want to have a global youth work or youth policy on a national, international level, then you have to be close to the local acting and the local thinking about it. And to close the third one, there is no good policy, also no good youth work policy, without a constant reflection and evaluation, and of course, a lot of self-mockery. Don't take it too seriously, because youth work is to be taken very seriously, but as playful and fun. So also have some self-mockery and some self-relativation if you talk about these things. That's my closing statement. So the last slide will, yes, click please. Thank you a lot for listening, and I'm really looking forward to your comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Now, after hearing all of this, we would invite you maybe to go to small buzz groups of 3 and maybe think about a question or a comment if you have for Professor or Dr. Redig. What would you like to ask? And then we will have a bit of a Q&A. So we would now invite you to make small trios, buzz groups, think about it, and also please do write it in Mentimeter. We will share it on our screen and you will see the code and everything. Yes? So 5 minutes starting now.